All right, three, two, one. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Jack Pine. He reached out to me, and we've been in communication about his experiences with the Jehovah's Witnesses. I did an interview with Mike Shemwell, Shemwell, of Shunned Podcast, who's done a lot of research, or was a former Jehovah's Witness, but has put forward a lot of research and many long-form talks. And I had an excellent conversation with him. And so tonight we're going to have another person with experiences with Jehovah's Witness who's going to share his story. It might be a little darker than last week's conversation. We're going to talk about dark subjects like the occult and pedophilia and some other elements that I didn't cover last week. So I just would like to proffer a warning to the listener. But Jack, are you there?
Yes, I am, William.
Awesome. Well, thanks for agreeing to the interview. I know that these subjects can be difficult, so I appreciate you taking the time and the effort to share your story. Usually what the best way to do at the intro of telling these stories is just tell a little bit about your background, talk about how you came into this group, and then we can get started from there.
All right, sounds good. I was born and raised a witness. My mom, on her side, I'd be a third generation in. So my entire social structure was entirely Jehovah's Witnesses. There is family that are not, and in the religion, of course, they don't tell you can't hang out with your family, but it's encouraged to minimize the time, just because everything is supposed to be focused on the preaching work and just around Jehovah's people, so-called.
And so your family was involved. So you basically went to the witness hall, every Sunday, and if not for other meetings like Mike Shemwell, you went there on Tuesdays, Thursdays, etc. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So it's a pretty heavy schedule. Things have changed in recent years, but it used to be when I was a child, you would meet 3 times a week, and there were 2 meetings that were 2 hours long, and then there was a meeting sometime during the middle of the week they used to call the book study, and that would be an hour long. So you're looking at least 5 hours, and it was heavily encouraged that you study for all of them. So that could, however much amount of time you wanted to do, the more time, the better. That was encouraged. So your schedule was just in complete indoctrination.
Gotcha. And you pretty much accepted at an early age that this was the proper religion, the true faith, correct?
Yeah. Growing up, when I was a kid, I really didn't have any doubts about it. In fact, my wife and we were talking and just kind of reminiscing on what it was like growing up, and you have this sense of I can't think of the right word, but just feeling special because you're in the true religion. How fortunate we are. I can't believe that God would pick me,
So like
or my
special,
family.
elect, chosen, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's this this special feeling, and you were exposed to all of these teachings that the end was coming soon, that you had to go out and pioneer, I think was a term that I saw this. So those were important parts of your life, is looking at all the Jehovah's Witness literature as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you feel like it was like you had that feel of that the world was going to end imminently, that it could be right around the corner? Was that something that was real for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, even though I consciously don't believe in it, the indoctrination is so strong that I mean, just last week I had nightmares about Armageddon
Wow.
coming.
So, were those common even from an early age? That was a real thing for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that and I would like to say, at least in my experience, for people that I knew, most witnesses, children growing up, something else they're afraid of is demons. Everybody was afraid of demonic activity.
So, do you feel like that was a core component or an important component of the Jehovah's Witness teachings?
It is in the sense that they just wanted you to stay away from anything that was like deemed of the occult.
Gotcha. So there was fear of demonic entities as well. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah, in fact, growing up, you would hear stories from people that would say that they had dealt with it maybe when they were studying. I recall a story of a sister. She had said that her mother had been a witch, and when she had started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, this witch had cursed her, and her husband were attacked demonically. And it wasn't until she called out on the name Jehovah that it left them alone. And so there's this indoctrination where people feel they would almost use the name Jehovah as a good luck charm, although it was told you're not supposed to use it as a good luck charm. But anytime any kids were afraid or had nightmares, they were told, pray to Jehovah, say his name out loud, and the demons will flee.
Interesting. So it definitely, maybe not specific to other Christian sects, but that was in your and Jehovah's Witness. That was definitely there, or an element that you dealt with.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Gotcha. So, in your experience as you got older, you um, definitely had an experience where you started asking questions about your faith. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, I did. My, it's funny. My dad and I, we liked science fiction movies, and we kind of bonded over that. And I don't know if you remember in the '80s that show Unsolved Mysteries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, shows like that. Like he was really interested in that as well. And so I remember there was an episode. I guess back then they called it the Satanic Panic, and
They
there
still
was.
they still use that term. So
Oh
satanic,
yeah.
but it's a loaded term, like conspiracy theories. But sorry to
Oh,
interrupt.
exactly. And so there were that and things like Freemasonry. I was always interested in it. Obviously, never pursued it because you're told from the platform not to. Um, but those things always kind of held my interest, and so it wasn't until I got older that I started kind of digging into that somewhat. But at what you were getting at from the email that I had sent you, in my teens, there was a young married couple that my friends, my parents had befriended, and after they had gotten married, shortly after, uh, the sister had come to the realization that she had been part of a satanic ritual as a child and had endured it for quite some time. Um, but like I said, it wasn't until later it came out, and it actually came out with her having split personalities. I think now they call it DID, if I believe.
Dissociative identity disorder, right?
Right,
And
right.
she was a member of the Jehovah's Witnesses, correct?
Yeah, she was, and supposedly her father was an elder, and so that's a position that's held in the congregation. Elders are not paid clergy like in other churches. It's all completely volunteer. But in order to become an elder, you have to be looked at in the congregation as considered a spiritual person, like somebody who would spend a lot of time in the ministry, supposedly somebody that's taking good care of their family, um, providing for them materially and spiritually.
Gotcha.
So that's really where my questioning started coming in when I found out about this. Like I said, I wouldn't have believed it, but one day the couple had come over, and I was at a friend's house. I think I came back, and my parents sat me down. They were there, and this lady, she said, she goes, one of my personalities would like to say hi, if that's okay. And I didn't know how to take it as a teenager, but I said, okay, go ahead. And so she just sat there, and like in a split second, this little girl's voice came out of her, and her demeanor, her body language, I mean, even her eye movement, I mean, everything about her changed. And so from at that point, like I knew that that was real. I knew that satanic activity is real, a real thing.
So then you thought, and so I guess that begged the question for you. Just confirm if this is correct. That why is this satanic activity taking place in Jehovah's Witnesses? Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. Because elders supposedly are appointed by Holy Spirit. So as a congregation, the elder body who's already there will observe a person, and if they feel that they're uh, a good enough witness to be an elder, they make a suggestion either to the circuit overseer, and I think this has changed over time, but they used to write a letter back to, they called it Bethel, or back at Watchtower headquarters, and supposedly Holy Spirit would kind of guide the brothers, telling them yes or no.
Interesting.
As
So where is the headquarters of the Jehovah's Witnesses? Is it Pittsburgh?
that's I want to say that's where it started originally. Now it's in Warwick.
Warwick. And that's in Pennsylvania? I
Um,
don't know where Warwick
I
is.
think it's New York.
Warwick,
Warwick,
New
New York.
York, right. And then the people who work there are called Bethelites, right? And that's kind of like another higher status position within JW, is that correct?
Um, yeah, I guess you could say that. It depends on how you want to look at it, but it was always viewed as something for young people to strive to.
Gotcha.
If you were considered, putting Jehovah first, you'd want to serve at Bethel at headquarters.
Gotcha. So, so you had this experience, and that would you say that was the real seed that kind of made you start asking questions?
Yeah, yeah, that was definitely the beginning of it. Um, Over the years, there's other things that have come up, just things that don't make sense, and like people would say, cognitive dissonance is is there for sure. You just kind of make excuses for certain things.
Hmm.
Um, I can't really say what in particular, but I mean, any witness that you talk to, or somebody who's an ex-witness,
Hmm.
will tell you there's just a number of things that that just after a while it doesn't make sense. And so, like for myself, although I still believe in God, I believe in the Bible, but at this point, I kind of feel like Satan has corrupted all organized religion, and I don't know what truth is, biblically speaking, or if there is a religion that really has it.
That's true. Right. They all claim to have it too. That's one of the truths.
Yeah,
They're all different, but they all claim to have the truth. So that's an interesting analytical truth. That's an analytical truth because the Catholics are right, the Mormons are right, the JWs are right, the Seventh Day Adventists are right, the Protestants are right, the Lutherans are right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I
No,
mean, they've
no
got the
matter who
correct
you
one.
talk to,
Yeah,
they all claim to have to have the true religion.
true religion, right? So
Yeah. So
um,
it's funny. There's a thing. There's actually a gentleman named Lloyd Evans, and I think if you ever have an opportunity to, I think you would find it very interesting. He's probably, I would say he's they would deem him the top apostate.
oh, interesting.
Um,
I've never heard that. Oh,
he anyway, he has a YouTube channel called the John Cedars channel, but he is very factual. He can show I mean, way back when the organization began, and just kind of brings out, you know, failed prophecies that have happened over and over again. Like so many religions, Jehovah's Witnesses have given dates to supposedly when the end would come, and each of them has failed in the past. I think they've learned from that, so now they don't give a specific date. They just kind of tell you to view the signs of the times.
Right. So it's coming short. It's just right around the corner.
Yeah,
It's coming.
it's always right around the corner,
It's
and
hovering
so
over you. Yeah. It's just a matter. It can happen
yeah,
in an instant, right?
yeah, yeah.
And I mean, do you feel that a lot of your questioning and thing were also coming around at the time that a lot of information was available online?
Yeah, more and more. I guess when it first started, my questioning first started, the internet wasn't really up and running like it is now. Um, Now, I mean, you can find out anything you want now, but back then, I really had nowhere to turn.
And
I think the first thing I did once I was old enough, I was out driving, had my own money. I picked up a book called "Ruled by Secrecy." A guy named Jim Mars wrote it,
yeah, yeah.
and that was kind of one of the things that kind of started waking me up to events that have happened around the world. I mean, people would just deem him a conspiracy theorist, but there's a lot of questions that, I mean, you can't just, I don't know, you can't just brush it off.
But
There's ways.
he's a very robust researcher. His books are very factually dense for me. I mean, to call him. I mean, I think that I think that he actually is a legitimate journalist on a lot of different subjects.
Yeah,
JFK.
yeah.
So
No, he was. From what I understand, I think he that was his profession, as he was a journalist
yeah.
before he started writing books. And I think he just saw how corporate media was ran, and he didn't like it and decided to go off on his own.
I think you're right. Yeah, but yeah, unfortunately we lost him recently. But so that was it. So you're looking at questions. Do you feel that when you're looking at things that dealt with masonry or the occult, that you were like, oh my gosh, there might be something here in Jehovah's Witness?
Yeah, yes. I'm sure researching it, you've run into the name Charles Taze Russell.
Yes, of course. And I researched him when I did my last Jehovah's Witness interview, and I had heard rumors about him even before this subject kind of came to the forefront for me. I heard that, and I've heard that actually in other religions of Masonry involved with Joseph Smith as well. So I was always kind of curious to investigate that further.
Yeah. So at least growing up, one of the first things I noticed and was always curious about was his. It's not his grave, but there is. I guess you could call it like a monument that was in his honor, and it's of a pyramid. And it's just weird that why would a Christian man have this pyramid?
Pyramidal, and that's actually common for other occultists, is to supplant either a cross or just words like referencing the Bible, but to have a pyramid. So that's very suspicious, and you can see that online. You can just see this Charles Ray Taze Russell pyramid in
Yeah,
granite, yeah, made
absolutely.
out of granite. Yeah.
Yeah, and even Jehovah's Witnesses have a book called the Proclaimers Book, and it's kind of it's their what the organization has given them for their official history, or I guess some people would deem it their whitewashed history.
Right.
But even in that book, it shows that, and so it's just written off as that he was into the pyramid. That's actually where the belief of 1914 came from originally, was he measured the lengths in the pyramid, and supposedly these pyramid inches added up to brought him to a date, but those dates changed over the years. I apologize, I can't remember. The first one was like 1873 or something like that, in the 1870s, and then later on it turned into 1914
Right.
after. So once the time had come and gone, another measurement was taken, and supposedly that was a brighter light.
Wow. But they did something kind of unique where they said it actually did happen. It just happened in a non-tangible way. It happened in the spirit realm at Christ's return, if
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember
He
correctly.
said that Christ had an invisible return in
Yes.
1914, and that is still what Jehovah's Witnesses hold today. However, the pyramid explanation is not given. Instead, they uh, I apologize. It's been a while since I
That's
since
okay.
I've studied the material, but it was that's not the teaching today. They believe, I think Jerusalem fell at 607 BC, or excuse me, BCE, and which archaeology is completely disproven. So again, there's really no weight to the dates that they're given.
Right. Did you find that there was this element of Jehovah's Witness truth, like our truth, as opposed to external truth? Did you experience that in the church or in the group?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you would talk to any witness and they would pride themselves on having in fact, that's kind of a word whisker that they use is they call it the truth.
The truth.
So they would say, oh, growing up in the truth, it's, we did this or we did that, whatever the case.
Oh, interesting. So, and you were also, I think it was common within the Jehovah's Witness to get married fairly early. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah, it was basically the experience for myself. It, you're a teenager and you're horny and you're trying not to get in trouble. So yeah, my first wife and I got married when we were 18.
Oh, gotcha. And so that there was because of you kind of were doubting, and she wasn't. That caused a rift. Is that correct?
Yeah, she started pursuing things in the organization. Um, she would volunteer more time in the ministry, and I would do what I could to support it, but it was never enough. And I think if you talk to any other witnesses who are stepping away from it, that's the consensus is everybody feels that no matter what you do, it's never enough. There always needs to be more.
Were you a person who was dedicating 50 hours a month to the cause or to pioneering?
I auxiliarily pioneered for a few months over the years. Nothing, not they call it a regular pioneer, somebody that does it for 1 year. Auxiliary pioneering is you dedicate so many hours per month, and the times have changed over the years again. But yes,
Do you find that is it true within the Jehovah's Witnesses that pioneering is successful and there are many converts, or do you feel like it's finding a needle in a haystack?
it's still, you're right, it's still finding a needle in a haystack.
Interesting. So you're spending a lot of energy, but not necessarily, finding multitudes of converts to the Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, yeah, growing up in it, I had doors slammed in my face, people yell at you, threaten you, and whenever anybody would get upset, you just excuse yourself and walk away. But I think back in the day, they used to be really confrontational. They would stick their foot in the door and
Interesting.
not and just try and they're like, hey, we're trying to give you God's message.
Interesting. Um, and so you essentially became you just the relationship between you and the Jehovah's Witnesses dissipated, correct?
Uh, yeah, my first wife and I ended up getting a divorce, and it was because we had drawn so far apart. And I mean, I'm big enough to say that it was my fault. Instead of getting help for it, I just kind of drifted farther and farther away. And eventually, somebody else started showing me attention, and my wife and I split. and I ended up with a girlfriend who wasn't a witness, and so because of that, I ended up getting disfellowshipped.
Gotcha. And what did you find that to be a shattering experience? What were your thoughts about it at the time?
Oh, yeah, that was the hardest experience of my life. Um, just because you don't have to be there, but they do announce it to the congregation, and so they suggest that you do be there as part of the process of showing repentance. So if you want to come back, they do want you to come back, but they say that disfellowshipping is to kind of correct yourself and draw. You're supposed to draw close to Jehovah while you're not a part of the congregation. So you're allowed to be there, but you're not allowed to associate or speak to. And it's a really hard experience because some people will smile and acknowledge you, but won't, they can't say hi. But others, it's such an awkward experience. They don't know what to do. So it's like they look right through you. You just don't exist.
Wow. So you're kind of like at the hall, at the witness hall, but nobody is allowed to talk to you. So it's kind of like you're ghosted or something.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, you would walk in when the opening song starts. Well, because everybody's supposed to be seated already, and then when the closing prayer ends, then you walk right out.
Wow. Were you at that time? Were you the only one experiencing that, or was there a smaller group within the congregation that were like
Um,
that?
yeah, there were some other people, although you're still told not to associate with other people who are disfellowshipped.
Wow. So you're just totally alone. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So but like I said, that it I could say it definitely did a number on me mentally and emotionally. And still to this day, I've gotten better, but I'm still dealing with that. In fact, my wife has just gotten a job to where we have benefits, and so now it's like I'm happy because I can finally start getting some counseling and hopefully get some closure.
Do you feel that that's probably the same experience for people who are disfellowshipped or shunned? Is disfellowshipped is the same as shunning, or are those differences?
Um, I th- I think in the ex JW community, it's viewed as the same thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like the organization would say, no, we don't shun people, but that's really what it means. Is once you're disfellowshipped, you're shunned.
You're shunned. Gotcha. And so, what happened next?
Um, because of everything that I was experiencing, it was just I started self-medicating. I was drinking too much. I wouldn't say I became an alcoholic, but that's definitely how I was dealing with things. And I eventually, after my divorce had finalized, I was still going to meetings. I was trying to get, they call it reinstated.
Hmm.
And so the whole time I was going, but you're lonely. You're looking for anybody that will talk to you or spend time with you. There was a woman that I ran into at a convention, and I knew her from my childhood, and we hit it off. But I told her at the convention, I said I'm disfellowshipped, and she said, "Oh, I don't care. I'm just glad you're here." And so a couple weeks later, I think I found her on Facebook, and we went out on a date, and that was that. We after that we just continued to date. Because we were dating, she got disfellowshipped herself. We eventually got caught, and then so both of us didn't have anybody to turn to other than each other, and so we got married. And so it was for the wrong reasons, um, but that marriage quickly failed, and in fact, she became violent. She was an alcoholic. She was bipolar, and so it was just a bad situation. So once again, I had to get away, and during that time, although I was dealing with that, I had been disfellowshipped long enough, and the elder body felt that I was repentant of what had happened before, and so they did reinstate me. but I was still going through this and basically hurt feelings between friends and family. Um, they still, they could talk to me, but nobody really went out of their way to talk to me or help me. And so my wife and I at the time, after I split, I had no place to go. So I was homeless. I was living out of my car and just living in my office.
So you were also shunned by your family, that family that brought you up in the Jehovah's Witnesses as well, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Wow. So,
And it's really, you're told not to because if you do, it could hinder that person from coming back to Jehovah. And so that's why everybody's doing it. Family members are doing it with a good intention. They feel that they're helping you, or they're being told that it's going to help you in the long run. But looking back on it, to me, it's kind of like having an abusive spouse, and they're hitting you. It's like, why are you making me hit you?
wow,
It's
yeah.
kind of the same idea. I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's very rough. And that, so you basically just had a really tough time. And how long did these difficulties last?
Um, Not too much longer. I'd say after we separated, within 3 to 6 months, I think we started with a divorce. And so I got divorced. But it's difficult because for Jehovah's Witnesses, you can't get a divorce and then automatically start dating somebody if you meet someone. You have to prove either that your spouse has been unfaithful, or they have to die. They pass
Wow.
away.
Wow.
And so it's embarrassing to say it now, but basically I had to Facebook stalk her until there were posts where she was saying that she was staying at some guy's house. And so that was the only way I could give proof to the elder body that I would be free to marry. And so I know it sounds kind of weird, like free to marry, but for Jehovah's Witnesses, you only date if you're ready to get married. Like dating isn't viewed as just something that's recreational.
Hmm.
It's for
It's for
the
the purpose.
specific purpose of, yeah, finding a wife or a husband.
So eventually you kind of came back, but what created the final break? I mean, do you consider yourself an ex Jehovah's Witness right now?
Um, it's funny in the in that world of, I guess you would say, call them apostates. They call them PIMOs,
What's that mean?
and it means physically in but mentally out.
Wow, physically in. Okay, Pimo, gotcha.
And so that's kind of how I feel right now. I've stayed away from it. It's what they would call fading.
Oh,
Just if you're kind of out of sight, out of mind.
gotcha. So they
And
don't pay you mind, you don't pay them mind, but you're still affected for you're still living that path. You still know about it and all that stuff. I think Shemwell talked about that as well. This whole
yeah,
fading
yeah.
process.
And so, basically, my wife and I, both of us, we just don't believe it anymore. But if we were to tell that to our families, like they would consider it completely unacceptable. You're viewed as being a weak person or spiritually weak, or they would say that Satan has gotten to you, something along those lines.
So apostates also means that Satan got to you. Is that correct? Is that a similar outlook at all apostates?
Yeah,
Wow, that's
they've
intense.
actually said it from the platform. They said that apostates are part of the Antichrist.
Wow, that's
So
really intense.
yeah, so you can see, the language that they're using to really try and scare witnesses from not talking to ex-witnesses. So anybody that could show any kind of information that opposes it is automatically, for lack of a better word, demonized.
Wow, that's really intense. I didn't know that. I mean, it's the same like in Islam apostasy. In certain parts of Islam, if you're apostasy, they'll kill you. And then in Mormonism, it's a kind of very being called an apostate is like fate worse than death. It's just like, oh my gosh. So
Yeah, and that's really how witnesses view it as well. They, if once you're, that is the unforgivable sin. I don't think I've ever heard of somebody that's been an apostate and has been able to reconcile and come back into the Jehovah's Witnesses.
So you also are finding out or have found out that some of the hints of the occult are real, that there are, that either Russell or somebody else has integrated, flat out occult concepts and teachings within Jehovah's Witness. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would add though that modern day Jehovah's Witnesses really don't have anything to do with the original writings that Russell wrote about.
Mm-hmm.
There's that I sent you a picture of that book
Mm-hmm.
of the finished mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Those you can't find those in any Kingdom Hall now unless it's like encased in glass or part of like an exhibit in an assembly hall.
Remarkable. So nobody reads it either. So it's hard to find and nobody reads it?
Yeah, exactly. And really, from I still haven't. I've read excerpts of it here and there, but from my understanding, is it's a lot of it is very occultic.
Interesting.
You would have to dig to find it, but I believe it's there. Early writings from Jehovah's Witnesses, uh, there was Russell and his predecessor Rutherford uh, both said something along the lines of being in communication with angels,
Mm.
like the angels were directing the work,
Fascinating.
and so they do cite scriptures, and depending on I guess what your belief system is, you could take it that way, or you would look at it and say, well, isn't that spiritism? And so it wasn't until I actually started looking at the occult, and I want to make it very clear, I do not practice occult things, but I do see occult connections, and in order to do so, you have to look in those types of books
Right.
or research those organizations.
I'm not a practitioner, but you realize once you read those root books, you go, oh, these guys are using symbols and elements that come straight out of masonry or the occult, which is the occult. So.
Yeah. So I found I was actually there's a gentleman named Chris Everard. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
Yeah, he's an English researcher.
Yeah, and I was watching one of his documentaries. I think it was something on the Illuminati, and it was showing some kind of like magic or the symbols that are used in magic ritual. And I saw the tetragrammaton like in the magic circle, and that's supposed to be the four letters of God's name.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of shocked me because growing up as a witness, you're always told, we'll call on Jehovah, say his name, pray to him, and, the demons will flee. But here I am, seeing this documentary, and did further research, and you find that the name, Jehovah, the Tetragrammaton, other names for God like Adonai, and other things are used in black magic quite often. And from my understanding, is Jehovah's name is used when you call forth angels, but it's used to bind them to your command, supposedly. I mean, that's what magicians say.
When they're summoning them, right? So
Right.
you're supposed to have this magic circle or something with these words on there, right? And I
Yeah.
think Crowley's magic circle includes the word Jehovah. I mean, when he draws his summoning circle.
Yeah, and that, it's funny, that would make sense somewhat. I was looking into other, high control groups, and the Plymouth Brethren, they actually have quite a number of similar beliefs as Jehovah's Witnesses.
Interesting.
It's like,
Well,
from what I've researched, there's no connection there as far as lineage from, I guess you could say, pastor to pastor or priest to priest, but the belief systems there, they do something very similar to disfellowshipping.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a number of things there.
Well, they
My
believe
wife
in
and I-
dispensations too, right? So is the Jehovah's Witnesses believe in dispensationalism?
You know what? That's a word that witnesses don't use now. I think it is used. In fact, if you go back to that Proclaimers book that I told you about,
Hmm.
it's like the whitewash version of our history. It's on page 162, and it kind of shows there's a pyramid chart called Chart of the Ages, and looking at it, it does say dispensation there. But it's not a word that's used in modern times that I'm aware of. I might have missed it, not paying attention, but um, anyways. But if you look at that chart of the ages,
Right.
you can see, there's no eye in the pyramid, but there's a capstone to the pyramid, and there's brilliant light coming off of it.
Right.
Very
I'm
similar
looking at it
to,
right now. I mean, it's
yeah,
talking about this first dispensation, second dispensation, third dispensation. So definitely no more taxes, top coat beards, or watchtowers. Revelation 21:4. Interesting. And where did Russell? Do you know where Russell got the name Watchtower for the missives or the the literature that he handed out?
yeah. Now the organization claims, oh God, what scripture is that? They say that it's scriptural. I think it's taken from Isaiah 21:8. I think that's where they why they use the name Watchtower.
Hmm.
Um, but I became, like I said, once I started studying these things, I found that watchtowers are also used in occult rituals. There is an encyclopedia, um, the new encyclopedia of the occult. Somebody named John Michael Greer wrote it.
Hmm.
Do you mind if I read it?
No, not at all.
Okay. So there's watchtowers. It says, in modern pagan practice, manifestations of the four directional powers, usually corresponding to the four elements and other aspects of the fourfold symbolism that plays so important a role in current pagan magical practice. The four watchtowers are imagined far beyond the magical circle in the four directions. Each functions as a protective power for the circle, as well as a portal to the other realms of being. So the watchtowers are presided over by the watchers. So in most rituals for casting a magical circle in modern paganism, calls to the watchtowers play an important part. It says the four watchtowers cannot be traced in pagan practice before the 20th century and are probably borrowing from the Golden Dawn magic, where the four Enochian watchtowers play a similar part in some ritual workings.
Interesting. Do you
Uh,
think that Russell might have come across this information?
I would think so, because to as far as I'm aware, I believe the Golden Dawn was around when they were around, and
Absolutely.
it
Yeah.
was an organization that was fairly well known. Um, Russell, while he spoke against Freemasonry, he was also friends with Freemasons, and that was known to many Jehovah's Witnesses and the public. And
Interesting.
so there's nothing that I can, show that's absolute proof, but there's a lot of Masonic symbolism that's given reference to in the artwork and just sayings that you don't hear really anywhere else other than Masonry. When I sent you that email, when you look at Aleister Crowley's book, the Book of the Law,
Right.
you see that winged sun disk on
Right.
the front.
Right.
And Charles Russell, he had a 6 volume, excuse me, it was like 6 or 7 volume set, and the last one was called The Finished Mystery. But on the cover of each of those, you see the winged sun disk.
Right. That comes out of masonry. I mean, that's about as mason as it gets.
Oh
So.
yeah, I mean you can look at temples, Freemason temples, and you see them all over the place.
Right.
And so I believe there's even that documentary that you did with Tom Horn.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, there, the winged sun discs are also used to go around a magic square.
Right. So potentially he might have gone big. The winged sun is a symbol associated with divinity, royalty, and power in the ancient Near East, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. But if you throw in the Watchtower, you throw in some John Dee mystery, actually, I mean, you want to have a really strange correlation is that the Advent, well, Mormonism, tons of angels, right? The angel
Right.
Moroni gives the book, but what was Joseph Smith and this guy who was working with Sidney Rigdon were doing are the exact rituals, style of ritual that Kelly and Dee were doing to summon this new angelic language, Enochian language. Not the Book of Enoch, but an actual Enochian language from this. John Dee, and they still have, in the Mormon church, they still have Joseph Smith's shoe stone. And what he would do is get a cap, like a big, like, not a bowler hat, but like a, one of these English style hats. I can't remember, but he'd put the stone into it, stick his face in there, do some rituals, read the stone. Rigdon would be his scryer. I think it was a seer. There's a seer, and then there's the writer. And so Rigdon would write down, and that's how the Book of Mormon was received. That's how they wrote it. Supposedly some kind of translation. So they're doing these Kelly rituals, and then you tie this in with the watchtowers of Edward Carey during the original Enochian worships, and you start referencing, and even the book you had, you reference Israel Regardie, who was one of Crowley's followers, who wrote a book about the Golden Dawn. I mean, he basically is the go-to book referencing all the Golden Dawn magic. So there's a very uncomfortable overlap between modern magical practices based upon old magical practices and Mormonism and JW, and probably Milleritism, Seventh-day Adventism. And Miller was a Mason, so
Right.
you really got to look at these guys, with some suspicion.
Yeah, and that's the, if there's like one or maybe two things you can kind of brush it off, oh, it's a coincidence, or maybe that was something that was popular at the time. But after a while, I've just run into so many things that overlap. It's impossible to ignore.
Yes.
I just,
right.
As far as the watchtowers, like you were saying, Edward Kelly, just so people don't think that, oh, well, that's a new pagan practice that, Satan is probably trying to make Jehovah's Witnesses look bad. Edward Kelly, he was way before the Watchtower. It was Queen Elizabeth, right?
Right. So Dee was Queen Elizabeth's magician scholar, and Kelly was a guy who was he was a fortune teller, and Dee needed somebody, and Kelly became his kind of. I think I forgot the terms. It's a seer. One person is a seer, and the other one is the scryer or something. So the other one writes while the other.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
I don't know. I wish.
I know it's crazy. Just there's so much there. There's something else. Although it doesn't say a watchtower. There's the book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages from Manly T. Hall. And so in it, at least the copy I have, on page 241, there's a picture of Diana of Ephesus, and it's an idol, and on top of it, you see a watchtower on top of her head. And if you don't mind, I'll read this real quick.
Please do. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it said, crowned with a triple tower-like tiara, and her form adorned with symbolic creatures representative of her spiritual powers, Diana stood for the source of that imperishable doctrine which, flowing from the bosom of the great Multimedia, is the spiritual food of those aspiring men and women who have consecrated their lives to the contemplation of reality. And to me, that sticks out because Jehovah's Witnesses consider spiritual food to come from the organization, the Watchtower, or the Faithful and Discreet Slave. That's where we receive our spiritual food. And so you see this language, similar language that's used over like I said before, it's just too much. There's so much there.
Similar language from esoteric teachings in Jehovah's Witnesses. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I mean, when I was talking with with Mike Shemwell. It's just like there's parts of the Jehovah's Witness that are not biblically based. They're not. There are parts of it that are, but even the reliance upon the name of Jehovah is not really from the New Testament. It's not. It's not really. The Jehovah's Witnesses call themselves a Christian organization, but there really isn't that kind of emphasis upon Jehovah in biblical Christianity, at least in my understanding.
Hmm. Yeah, that it's funny. That's something. It's still hard for me because, like I said, those things are so ingrained in you. Um, I guess there's still a part of me that would like to prove uh, Jehovah to be true.
Hmm.
No, nobody wants to think that they wasted 40 years of their of their life in something. Um, so, like I said, I'm still searching. I'm not cut off to anything, but I'd like just looking at things with a non-biased view and hoping that I can find some kind of truth that way.
Well, it's interesting too. Another one that's interesting is the Finished Mystery. You could put it right by Key to the Mysteries by Eliphas Levi, and they both look like occult books. So like a helping
Yeah,
hand for Bivings. Like you could probably look at some of these phrases and they probably use them in Masonry. I don't know, but
yeah.
when
From what I've found is I think Eliphas Levi he was the first one, at least that I've been able to find so far, that used Jehovah in magic ritual.
wow, interesting.
And so, but what's funny is, like I actually learned from listening to your information that Crowley believed that he was the reincarnation of Eliphas Levi, right?
Exactly. So at least his real name was Alfred Lewis Constant, but he died in 1875, and then Crowley was born. So Crowley believed one of his many reincarnations, but his primary reincarnation was Eliphas Levi, and he was carrying on the work. So, and there's a translation of Eliphas Levi's, I think, The Key to the Mysteries, which is by Eliphas Levi, but translated by Crowley. So Crowley was very intimately involved in that, and yeah, all that stuff actually translates into Masonry. So one of the main books of Masonry is Morals and Dogma, written by Albert
Albert.
Pike, who lifted a lot. My understanding is lifted a lot of the material from Eliphas Levi. So you see this symbolism of the Sphinx and all these to know, to will, to dare, to remain silent. And a lot of these ideas and concepts, my understanding is Albert Pike lifted from Levi. That was the chief influence upon Morals and Dogma.
Yeah, that's what my understanding of it was. It's funny is let me see there's a little excerpt from Morals and Dogma
Hmm.
um, that I think would stand out to witnesses.
Hmm.
I'm not sure what page it's taken from. It's actually quoted from another book, but it's of Morals and Dogma. But it says, Masonry, like all the religions, all the mysteries, hermetic and alchemical, conceals its secrets from all except the adepts and sages or the elect, and uses false explanations and misinterpretations of its symbols to mislead those who deserve only to be misled, to conceal the truth which it calls light from them, and to draw them away from it. So there's two things there that Watchtower uses constantly. Is the word whisker is they call it the truth, and when a new understanding comes up or they flip flop on an old belief, they call it new light, or the light has gotten brighter.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, there's like internal understandings within Jehovah's Witness, no doubt.
Yeah, and so
We're at 55 minutes. I unfortunately have to be somewhere at 7. Is there anything that you'd like to, we could definitely do another hour show and just talk about the occult stuff, but is there anything that you'd like to add to the listener, or anything we missed, or any important points?
yeah, a couple things real quick,
Okay,
if
go
you don't
for it.
mind.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Growing up in it, there was an Awake magazine back in '89. It was October 22nd of '89, and it was talking about Satanism and how it was a growing menace. And what's interesting is in that article, it actually goes into talking about Crowley
Oh,
and
interesting.
how Crowley was a Satanist, and just kind of goes along those lines. But they don't go into detail, but they actually mention Maury Terry,
Uh-huh.
who wrote The Ultimate Evil,
Right.
and they reference his book as those being Satanists. And my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was referring to the Process Church, right?
Maury Terry was covering the process. He thought the whole thing about Berkowitz was the process church that went to Arliss Perry through Minot, North Dakota. Yes.
Yeah, and so, but what's amazing about when I looked into the Process Church is they believe Jesus, Lucifer, Satan, and Jehovah. They believe in those four deities.
Correct.
And they kind of, I don't like it. Occult understanding is meant to be confusing,
Right.
but again, it's this occult group that's supposedly using the true God's name. And so, you can take it, I guess, any way you want. But either there's an occult connection there, but if you were to tell that to any witness, I think cognitive dissonance kicks in, and they say, oh, well, that's just Satan trying to blaspheme God's name. It would just come down to that, and not want to see the connections that there's so many, like we've gone over.
Right. Yeah. It gets to be a little bit disturbing. There's a lot there. Somebody needs to go back and look at these books and compare them to occult literature, because there was so much going on there at the late 19th century that these guys, the Millerites and the Seventh-day Adventists and the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and possibly even Christian Scientists who were also spiritists, really. Like I forgot her name, but she had, we used to see angels dancing around her mind. So there's a lot of interesting
Yeah.
things were happening in the 19th century. Jack, thanks so much. I appreciate your time. Love to have you back. We could, do an outline and go into further details if we can figure them out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk to you again. Thank